This is Career Coaching X's and O's, and I am your host, Mark Anthony Peterson, founder and thought leader at Ceyero-Consulting, a small business strategy and technology consulting firm. A small part of our practice is executive coaching. These episodes typically are the summation of some of our sessions. Instead, today we have a compelling interview with George McGehrin, president of the McGehrin Group, an executive recruiting and coaching firm that does a whole lot more and is geared to help you through these trying times. But before we get into that interview, I'd like to introduce you to our sponsor, consumervoice.org.
If you're looking for non-bias, technology-driven product reviews and ratings across various categories, check out consumervoice.org. Consumervoice.org ranks companies and products using a proprietary algorithm incorporating expert and customer reviews, user experience, lifetime value, and overall brand trustworthiness. Before you spend your hard-earned money, visit consumervoice.org.
And now, my interview with George McGehrin, president of the McGehrin Group. Welcome back to the podcast. We have an exciting show for you today. We have Mr. George McGehrin. He's the president of the McGehrin Group, and he's going to share some valuable information with you today. If you run a high-growth organization, you're an executive, you're top talent, and you're in the midst of the turmoil that we're facing now during this 2020 pandemic, you're going to want to listen to every word of this show. You may be one of those individuals who've been caught in the midst of organizational change, and you need to make yourself more relevant to companies that are looking to hire. Well, we're going to focus in on that problem from every angle today. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about Mr. McGehrin. As I mentioned, he's the president of the McGehrin Group, an executive talent acquisition agency. He studied economics at the University of Oxford and finance at Seton Hall University. So this guy has a really good background when it comes to thinking about business and how to build healthy, successful careers. But enough of me telling you about his merits. Let's turn to him and let him tell a little bit about himself and his journey to get to this point. Mr. McGehrin, welcome to the podcast.
Mark, how are you? It's good to be on, and I appreciate it. By the way, very kind words. My dad used to say that I was smarter than I looked, so I appreciate the kind words about the education there. So, no, it's good to be on, and I know some of the topics that we're going to dig into extremely relevant to kind of what we're going through as a country and just as globally, right? And for some of the executives out there, like we're in a different world, right? So I'm excited to be on with you here today.
Right. Now, what inspired you to build a career in executive and talent recruiting?
Right. So I started off in just sort of basic recruiting, right? So I was sort of working with guys I started off placing account payables and receivables clerks, right? And, little by little, payables clerk becomes a controller, then becomes a VP of finance, and then becomes a CFO. And there's something about the executive that I love. It's the chess playing strategy part of it versus the technician, right? And I'm intrigued by dealing with some of these folks, right? And how the way they think and process things and how they do their due diligence. I fell in love with it, and it sort of snowballed from one to the next. But I've been recruiting for 20 years now, right? So I've got a team, 30 people. But I started like everybody else in the sort of the low part of the totem pole. You just keep on moving up. And, next thing you know, you're dealing with folks that initially you were kind of scared of, right? 20 years ago, I was afraid to talk to the CFO, right? I was afraid to talk to the CEO. I didn't have anything in common with them. But as you grow with them, your career also grows as well. But I'm intrigued. They make a lot of mistakes, but they do a lot of good things too. Yeah. We've got a couple of businesses, by the way. We've got the recruiting piece. We have an executive coaching piece, which is terrific. From a coaching standpoint, it's pretty intense. It's not a cheerleader service, right? And we have a third business, which we just started, which is essentially getting other executives, if they want to build a brand, we literally book them on between 24 to 48 interviews as a guest. Let's say you're an entrepreneur and you want to sort of get your story out there. It's a sort of a set it and forget it service, right? It's actually based on my experience because that's what I've been doing. We'll get them on 24 to 48 shows in the year. They're all pre-booked. You just show up to the call, everything's done for you. And we help them through the process. So that's the third business we have as well. And then we've got the executive writing business. We've got the branding business for the resumes and LinkedIn and CVs and the board resumes. We've got that. We've got a lot of different things going on, but it's all geared towards the executive.
All relevant for what we're dealing with now, because these platforms are becoming the way you represent yourself. And for those who haven't spent enough time cultivating and interconnecting those profile points, they may miss the opportunity to find that right job. So I think you put together the right package. So over that time frame, you've seen different strategies that executives have used to make themselves relevant. And certainly right now we are in the midst of significant flux. What strategies should some of these executives employ to make themselves more relevant to companies that are looking to find their talent?
I would say the common denominator that's changed, that hasn't, COVID, the financial crisis in 2009, 2001, September 11th, and then we had the bond crisis. I don't know if you remember the bond crisis back in the day, but at the end of the day, I think the one main characteristics of all of these leaders is that they're phenomenal people. They're people. They're just they're all about the people, right? And the ones that worry about the people first, and then the product and everything else secondly, those are the ones that do well. I think it's one of the main characteristics of just a great leader, right? Terrific people skills. And they make you feel like you're the only person in the room, right? I don't know if you've had that experience with people where, I was talking to a CEO, he literally runs a $90 billion year company, right? And he's on the phone with me, and obviously he must have had a million things going on. He was so engaged with me, and I think that's a quality that a lot of people don't have. They're just so distracted with a cell phone or a note or a message. But a lot of these great leaders, they really, dive in and they're so engaged with you. But it's about the people first.
Jack Welch made that comment painfully clear so many times in his discussions and in his talks in grooming leaders, that he felt his job was to be the chief cheerleader in charge, to really the individual connections and find the motivations that help people achieve success. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I wonder, and 2020 has been rough, and certainly losing a leader like Jack Welch over the last year is a tremendous loss to coaches and leaders everywhere. I've often wondered, if he were coming up today, how would he manage the changing landscape, the gig, the sharing, the platform economy? Would his skill set still be as relevant, or would there require a different set of leadership and management skills to get the most out of this changing dynamic? What's your perspective on that?
I was sad to see that when he passed away. I was sad to see that. I think a guy like that, first of all, they adjust really well. Like, they're great at adjusting, right? So I think, the question number one is, would he have been able to adjust to XYZ situation? I think 100%, right? But his other model, right, of, let's keep the all-stars and let's get rid of the people that aren't, kind of playing, let's get rid of the D and F players and even the C players sometimes. And that was one of his that's what he's known for some of the things. I think his theory is going to work, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. And, it's just he was all about the people. I'll tell you a story. I run marathons and ultra marathons, right? I was on a run yesterday, and I was listening to a podcast, and there was a commercial for Noom, for Noom, the habit creating app. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the guy's name, but he said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm the chief psychology officer of Noom," And I thought that's really what a CEO is, like a CEO is really the chief psychology officer of a company, right? And it's and even you see this, right? Elon Musk, says something wrong on Twitter, then the stock goes down, right? We saw Jack Ma, right? Like, you see his stock went down because but I think a lot of these guys are just, really chief psychology officers of companies. And, but like a guy like Jack Welch, I think he would have done really well. A lot of these guys are already prepared for, a lot of these companies are already prepared for 2009, 2020. And I think that's the other aspect of that, right? there's a lot of companies that are doing well. We've got clients that are doing really, really well. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, there's other clients that are doing really, really well, and they've been prepared for it, right? So yeah, really interesting. I'll give you. I'm digressing here, but I've got a client of mine, major food company. Everybody in America has something that they make, in their house right now, right? And I was talking to the COO, and he said, George, we're gonna go very basically. We're going for the 80-20 rule. That's what we're doing, right? I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule as well, but he said we're going to get rid of everything that doesn't sell. We're going to stop manufacturing it. We're going to just focus on the stuff that sells. And that's what COVID is making this company do, major food producer. And so I think a lot of the great leaders are able to pivot and move on, So like Mark, this is not going to go on forever, right? The pandemic ends, right? And I think and this because from the coaching side, there's people that make excuses for everything and there's people that don't, right? And, right. If it's not COVID, it's going to be something else. It's going to be another excuse. And I think, you have to also get to a point where like, this is the reality we're in. Let's figure out how to play it.
When you look at that chief psychology officer and those relationships that you've cultivated, what have you seen to be some of the biggest and most common mistakes that they make in trying to be in that role as the chief psychology officer?
Yeah, I would say relatability. Relatability is a big problem. And it's terrible to mix politics with everything else. But I mean, I think Trump, for example, you could love him or hate him, but sometimes I would say it's hard for other people to relate to a guy, right, who flies around in helicopters. And so I mean, as a business owner, there's certain from some tax benefits, I'm a fan to some extent, but there's other things that he does, and I just think it's not a cool thing, right? But does he come off as to a guy who makes $50,000 a year? Does he come off relatable? Probably not. Does Michael Bloomberg, even though there's a picture of him riding the subway, does he come off as relatable? Probably not. I think that's a big mistake that you see some of these folks. They're so amazing what they do, but I think sometimes they have a hard time relating to just the average guy, who's just trying to, get enough money for a haircut or buy a cup of coffee or pay their kids' daycare. I mean, and I think and you brought up an example, which I'd love you to bring up if you don't mind. I think it was a great example of Jeff Bezos, but I'll let you bring that up. But that's a typical example of just, they grow and they can't relate to just normal people.
Right. The example we were talking about is, in the midst of COVID, the charge was given to the frontline employees to put together a fund that they would contribute to in case one of their colleagues got sick, and that money would go to that person to pay for their healthcare expenses. And that fell on flat heels, right? But when you have the richest man in the world as your CEO, it really did fall on. Yeah,
and he's not even. And he's not even like the richest guy in the world. He is like, he's the richest guy in the world, like, by a lot. But I agree. I think it's just the relatability is a problem. It's a problem for a lot of these. And by the way, I tell you, to go back to the politics, I think that's one reason why Hillary Clinton lost the first election, right? Is I think some people just couldn't relate to her, right? And, even if you liked her policies, it was just, I think she wasn't as relatable as other politicians.
If you were coaching her, what would you say to her? How would you help her move from where she was to where she needed to be in order to make those connections?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess my question would be, do you think that everybody is coachable? Because I don't know. I don't know. I mean, is she coachable, right? Like, is it, you hope she would be, but I probably wouldn't. My opinion is I don't think I would probably be able to coach her, quite frankly. I think there's some of them so these folks are so stuck at like you're sort of just a pawn in their progress. Right. And I probably wouldn't take her as a coaching client if I had the chance. Right. Because I don't think I don't know her. I don't know her personally, but I don't think she's coachable. Do you agree with that assessment? Or, I mean,
well,
do you think that everybody's coachable?
Yeah, I think everybody's coachable as long as they're willing to be humble. There's that great line from a couple of different movies. You got to take a walk in the other person's shoes. Yeah. And sometimes those shoes hurt because they're smaller than your feet, but they give you the bruises that understand their life. And you're right. Some people may not want to try those shoes on. And that is where the relationship has to end. But for those who are willing to at least lace up and and try to make that journey, there's an opportunity for them to cross that gap and close that gap and make some real connections.
Right. No, it's a good topic. Like, is somebody coachable or not? Right. Like,
right.
Are you coachable? And somebody might argue that she's not humble, right? You could argue that she is or not, but I think, I think her campaign tried to make her relatable, right? Like I think her Twitter feed was like, it was like grandmother, wife, they tried to, and she still wasn't able to pull it off, but I think they tried to make her relatable. And forgive me for not knowing if she's a Democrat or Republican. I'm kind of indifferent to here's a lady that I think is really relatable is Susan Rice. In my opinion, she's extremely relatable, right? Like interviews well, plays the piano. I mean, it's just I just enjoy Oprah completely, relatable, right? Like how do you not, it's hard not to like Oprah, right? But I guess the question is everybody coachable?
Right,
is everybody coachable?
Right. In your company's journey, you took people from accounts payable to the CFO. What?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes.
For those people who succeeded, what did you see in their personal growth and their relatability that helped them to move up in those ranks?
Yeah, it's a like a I can attitude. First of all, it's the first thing. Like I can do it. I can, and I will. It's funny. I remember this distinctly because I was sort of, I didn't learn this shit about myself. I think when you get older, you learn certain things about who you really are. And sometimes you would call somebody and they would say, "Oh, I'm no one. I'm just the accounts payable person." That's what they would say, right? And then you would call the next person and they would say, "Oh, I'm in accounts payable, but I'm going to be the VP of finance in like 2 years. That's my path." It's the same, the same type of role, but I'm just the salesperson. I just work here, which you see sometimes, right? You walk into a store like, "Oh, are you the owner?" "No, I just work here." And it's the other person that doesn't say, "No, I just work." I mean, the ones that get to a certain level, they've never had that "I just work here" mentality. They have this self-worth about, and almost like a longer 5, 10, 15-year plan of where they want to be. And that's the main difference between a lot of those folks. It's a lot of, I've got 30 people on my team. We just hired 10 more, so now we've got 40. I say 30, but I'm not used to the 40 number yet, but we've got, I have a younger guy on my team. I mean, to me, he's younger. He's 28, right? So that's young to me. I'm 45, but his work is amazing work. But he has this internal conversation with himself about how it's not great, how his work's it's not perfect. His work's not this and that. And that's a struggle I think some people have, they have a struggle with like, the work is fine. Like he does great work. Like he's worked for me for 5 years. Great work, but it's not perfect. No, my work is not perfect. Your work's not perfect, but it's that internal, that talk that you tell yourself, is Mark a good guy or is George a good guy or are we bad guys? I think that's the difference. The executives, when they get to the level, they've had that internal conversation for a long time about where they're going to be, So that's the main thing. The other thing is I noticed a lot of these guys have their version of the long term, they plan out their careers. When I talk to guys, they'll talk about the next 10, 15, 20 years of what's going on. They strategically plan what's going on in 20 years. And they hit it, they hit the mark a lot of times.
When they're looking out that far, they're envisioning their brand changing over that time frame to fit the
100%.
roles that they are seeking. Has that path to creating those types of brand gotten more difficult because of the times that we're in? And if so, what steps should they take to overcome some of these new barriers in creating their brand?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of, and I think there's a lot of mediums now, right? There's this, you and I are talking, on Zoom, right? A lot of folks didn't know what Zoom was 5 years ago, right? Or 4 years ago. For the coaching industry, it's kind of normal for us to have, Zoom as a normal thing, right? But, I would say, at the end of the day, it's always about a people to people game. That's what it's the people to people connection. And, that's not going to change. It's never going to change. But, you got LinkedIn, you can pretty much access anybody in the world, or you can access somebody that can access somebody. You have that. You have, it's so easy to get to people these days than it was 20, 30 years ago, right? So I don't know if this was what you did 20 years ago, but my situation, when I wanted to get a new client, I had to read the newspaper, literally read the Sunday newspaper. The guy had a promotion. And then on Monday, I'd call the guy and congratulate him I had to look for the phone number, and I'd call him and congratulate the person for, on his promotion, have a conversation, try to figure out how to break the ice. And then maybe we go to lunch or have a drink. And that's how it started. It was like dating to some extent, right? And you don't have to do that anymore. The world is so small. I think that's one of the things people have to take care of, right? I was before being able to hang out with you on your show today on the program. I was on a program just now for a different interview. I've been interviewed like 60, 70 times in the last, I don't know, it's been, last couple of months, but he's in Germany, I mean, the world is so small. That was impossible 20 years ago for me to be in a video interview, with a guy in Germany. Impossible. I think people need to realize that and take advantage of it. I mean, it's just the way it is. You have to be flexible too. I mean, we're in this environment where the office that I'm in, by the way, I'll tell you, the office that I'm normally in it's much nicer. It's closed down. Like I can't go in my office. So what did I do? I rented a little, I call it a man cave in like a medical building. I got an office. I work out of an office, and my team's all virtual anyway. But you have to adapt to whatever the situation is, and I think that's an important part for most people going forward.
Before we got on the call here, we were contemplating Elon Musk as we talked about
right.
this ability to build a brand. And, he's very much a force of personality. And some of that comes from his interaction with people. And we did a little thought experiment as to whether or not he could build that same brand in today's virtual world. And, I'm still kind of trying to piece that together to see if Tesla will launch today. Could he have the same sort of force as a personality that he has now if he were launching in the midst of this pandemic? And I think you're right. There are a lot of tools where he can reach probably far many more people than he could reach when he first launched the company, and still get his personality across in a way where he would have that impact. But he would have to work at it probably twice as hard because of the lack of that one-on-one interaction that he had in getting the people involved. Those early customers like movie stars who were buying the cars, and they were buying it because of their personal relationships with him. I wondered if he could pull that off in this environment.
Right. I mean, I think it'd be very difficult, right? He's also, I think it'd be very difficult. But there's a guy, right, that this guy's trying to go to Mars, right? So, if anybody could, he just, folks like that think differently than we do, right? They just, to be fair, they think differently. And if anybody could figure it out, it'd probably be him. But I think that personality of just like having him there, and I'm sure, I haven't met him either, but from what I hear, I know people that have worked literally for him, and, his intensity is like sort of like Steve Jobs, like from what I hear, from people that literally have worked, they've worked for him. I think there's a power to that. I don't know if you're a basketball, LeBron James, like, I'm pretty sure he plays the same in like a pickup game and, in some random city in, America than he would pay. I'm sure he plays the same way. Like he's intense. Right.
Right.
And,
right. That's the thought experiment I was trying to tease apart with the leadership styles, which is, I think there are certain leaders that draw that energy and run their organizations that way. They will have the moonshot, and the moonshot will draw in people who want to think big. But when you don't have that opportunity to draw from that energy, you have those players who are able to tactically lead a team to a goal and then set a new agenda and lead that team to the next goal. It's the mountain climbing approach. And LeBron is one of those few people I think that can do both. He can tell you he's going to win 3 championships, but then tactically lead a team without an audience to a milestone. Here's what we got to do first. We got to win the conference. We got to be this. We got to be that.
Right. And it's interesting though, they always talk about, those guys always talk about the mission, right?
Right.
Like Elon Musk's mission is like, let's go to Mars, right? That's the mission. Or let's build I want cars I want everybody to be able to afford an electric car, right? And his mission was, I want to make a car that's $30,000. They always stuck with the mission, right? It's like this long-term, it's amazing to see them do that. But LeBron James thinks like mission, they're all about the mission. Luckily it seems like, this is not going to go on forever, this pandemic, right? And it's going to be really interesting in like the whole tech world. You have Facebook, Google. A lot of these companies now are just saying, hey, you know what? Like you don't need to live in San Francisco or the Silicon Valley anymore, right? If you work for Facebook, you can live in Utah, or maybe mom and dad live in, Chicago. You can go back to Chicago. So I think that's going to change too. I think a lot of the whole sort of the U.S. market's going to change a lot. Where these cities, I live 5 miles from New York City, and I run there on weekends. I run Central Park every weekend, and there's a lot of people moving out. It's not everybody, But I can tell you, you do see a lot of moving trucks, a lot of, because you don't need to, a lot of these people now are going to work remotely. They don't have to live in New York City and pay $4,000 a month for rent,
Right.
They can go and they can go to Florida and pay $1,200 or, $1,500 for rent, live in sunny weather, no state taxes, and still work for the same company they work for anyway. Right.
Right.
So that's a major adjustment that we're in COVID. Like, that's something that it's going to change forever. COVID's here for a year or two, let's say, but that piece of the Facebooks and the Googles and all this and all these other companies where a guy's going to say, I'm not living in New York City anymore. I'm not going to live in Chicago. I'm not going to live in Atlanta. I'm going to live in, I'm going to live and have a view of the mountains. That's going to change literally for, I think that's to me, it's the major piece of COVID. That sometimes they don't talk about.
Has that changed how you run your business? Are you recruiting differently?
No,
that shift.
Well, so it's interesting to say enough. That's an interesting point. We have a client of ours they're a major. It's a major laboratory right here in the States. So they're doing COVID testing, and they're going to interview. They're interviewing. It's an executive search, and the 4 candidates that we found them literally live 10 miles. Right, so we do national searches, but they literally live it's like 5 to 10 miles from the company, right? And they're doing, they're just, we did a very localized search and they're doing a first round of interviews, right? And they're doing a via video, like a GoToMeeting video. So
and they're literally 10 miles from the headquarters, right?
And this is a $300,000-$400,000 role, right? Mm-hmm. And to conduct a first interview via video, it's just unheard of. And that's changed. We've got other clients. I've got a client of mine who's a very high paid executive in a bank. So, he works at, he works at Wells Fargo, and his job is remote. Like he doesn't have to go into, he spent his whole career literally going into New York City, like every day in New York City. And, he moved from one company to the next, and now his job is totally remote. Same pay. So that things are changing in that sense, right? That's definitely changed. So even the interview process is like, now it's, you and I were talking, and I'm in a normal sweater and things, but that's the next prep is we're going to start prepping candidates on how to present video and the lighting and the microphone and just the background. And that's a course in itself, to be fair. That's changed forever as well. This face-to-face kind of virtual environment that we're in now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go push on that a little bit more and try to unpack that, because if you're throwing the net out nationally, are candidates having to do a little more to make themselves known to these types of companies that are looking for top talent? Because now they're remote, they're spread out all over the world,
right?
And then when you do catch them, how do they make themselves relevant? How do they make themselves stand out? And I think you're right. People will end up with mini studios, at least in the interview process, to make themselves show that they can fit into the culture, so that they can fit into the company, and as well as perform the job they're being asked of. We just for my company, because we just bought. I'm not using it now. Hopefully, it doesn't show, but we just bought a professional camera, right, for some of these interviews, right, and and sometimes we're interviewing candidates, right, and now some of the client meetings, right, that we're having with clients, we're doing Zoom meetings where it's like one-on-one. And normally it'd be, hey, I'll come out to California and we'll grab a meal. Now it's we'll just do a call. So I think there's a lot of benefit to that as well, right? Because you save time and you don't have to, especially if you travel a lot. I don't know, do you travel quite a lot? I used to travel a tremendous amount when I was a management consultant. Every week it was a different hotel and a different bathroom.
Yeah, isn't that terrible? Until you really do it. You talk about the blessing to have your own pillow. It's like there's nothing like it. But I think that's changed. I think a lot of executives are kind of, they miss it, but they don't miss it, right? So, but I've got a lot of executives I'm working with that are telling me, hey, George, I'm looking to get back on a plane again to start seeing people, because they're so used to it. If you were sitting down with a set of junior executives right now who were looking to move up to that next level, what advice would you give them? So, and I don't know if you have special access to my Zoom. I had a call with actually a team of 5 executives last week on this. It was a training we did. So these are clients that we're working with, and we have other coaches on my team as well. But I was on this call, and that was the question. So that's why I don't know if you might have been whispering, like somewhere in my. This is the. I mean, and that was the question we dealt with. This is the number one thing, right? You need to start framing, and let's take right. You need to start framing the future version of you, your brand, your story. When you talk to people, you need to start framing that story, the future version. So it's not all about like what you do; it's also about what you're about to do. So that's what you're about to do. Like I've got a recruiting company. I'll tell you what I'm about to do. We're looking at opening up a recruiting branch in Australia, right? Like we're about to do that, right? Because we're open 12, 14 hours a day, but for the other 8 hours, my company it's like a factory to some extent, like it's just shut down, right? The lights are off and there's nothing going on. So I'd like to take advantage of the other 12 hours of the day, with the time difference and have a McGehrin Group that runs 24 hours, right? In one part of the world or another. But you need to start framing the future version of your story if you're a junior executive, right? The second piece of advice, really important, is, like right now you're sort of the bridesmaid, not the bride, right? For now. But you need to, sometimes the easiest way to get a promotion is literally to leave your current place and move on to the next place. Right. So, if you've got a management team that gives you initiatives and you execute on every one of them, and you're not really satisfied by kind of the career path, then it's time to leave. And you need to find your C-suite role at a different company, maybe a smaller place. If you work for a $2 billion, $5 billion, $90 billion company, go to a $300 million company and be a CEO or COO. If you're VP of finance at a large, $20 billion company, go to a $500 million company and be a CFO. And so you have to be willing to change and pivot, right? If you're really not satisfied, it's just you can't stay too long, because the steady Eddie approach also doesn't get you paid.
In making that pivot, should they develop a relationship with someone like yourself to help them navigate the options that are out there so that they land in the right spot? And if yes to that question, how do they develop a relationship with people like yourself?
Right. So I would say yes and yes, right? The first yes is yes. I think it's great to network with executive recruiters, right, and headhunters. Statistically, I'll tell you the statistics on this. There's an 85% chance that they'll find their next role through 6 degrees of separation. It's not through guys like me. That's the reality of the business, right? I think it's guys like me are like 10 to 15%, maybe it's 10%, right? But 85% of people they know, or people they know that it's just 6 degrees of separation. They really need to think about that and focus on that 85%. A recruiting, an executive recruiter, we should be a part of the playbook, not the whole playbook. If they apply to something online, which is terrible, I'm just telling you, it's not a great way to get a job. There's a 2% response rate, 2%. So 85% versus 2%. Like I'll do the 85%, right? But the executive recruiter route, I'd say it's part of the playbook. You should have multiple playbooks, almost like a sports team, right? Like you're not going to run the same play over and over. I'm not going to do a pick and roll 10 times in a row, right? It's like, okay, it worked once, worked twice, but it's not going to work 10 times in a row. So you need to have various plays. And the third piece of advice I would say, by the way, going back to the first question you asked before, was, you need to keep the math and the metrics and the KPIs to what works, what doesn't work, right? Like know the math. If you got six of your buddies got you 6 other phone calls that turned into 2 interviews, and 2 interviews turned into an offer, like know the math on that, so you can reverse engineer things. And you talk about the process of things. You need to come up with a process mathematically where you understand your KPIs. And just like you have a KPI for a business, you have a KPI for Mark Inc. or George Inc. Right? Like you've got a $500,000. If you make a couple $100,000 dollars a year, $500,000, $1 million, that's $1 million problem you're trying to solve for yourself. So that's my advice to those folks, is make sure you have lots of playbooks and keep the math to it.
One last little point before we wrap the podcast up on that. So that networking piece is one that a lot of candidates struggle with. Are there some words of wisdom around creating the right group of associates so that 6 degrees of separation yields that result, that job you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's some easy things too you can do. I mean, you can give first and then take. And I say take, and it's a rough word, but you need to give. You can give value first, right? And I mean, here's a great example of how this could work, and I'll just use sort of our relationship as an example, right? So you've interviewed me, right? You've taken the time to interview me, and you've been extremely polite, and your questions are super kind. You haven't drilled me too hard, right, today, so which is good. If my end game is to network with you and see who you know, I can say, hey, Mark, like, let me refer you 3 people that would be great guests from your show, right? I've got 3 people that I thought about. Let me refer them, right? So I make the referral, and then I make sure that you talk to these folks, and I help you. And what I could do is I could literally look at everybody you've interviewed, anybody that's interesting, and I could say, oh, that guy looked interesting that Mark interviewed, and then I go back to Mark. Mark, you interviewed this guy. Could you make an intro for me? Like, he seems like a nice guy. I'd love to talk to him. Could you do that favor for me? And of course, Mark's going to do that favor, right? And because I already gave you value, So I think the problem that people go after is they go, hey, Mark, you interviewed this guy. Can I talk to him? And it's like, you really don't want to. It's just, I think people naturally want to help people, but I think you need to help other people first, and then you can ask for help. That's you've seen this before, right? Like, it's like the taker, the guy that takes, and it doesn't fly. It doesn't work at an executive level. You need to give. And I think that's an easy technique. And I'm using us as an example, but you can do that with a lot of different things. Hey, Michael, like, I saw that, you might be in the market. Listen, I've got somebody you should talk to. You should talk to him. There might be an opportunity there. Like, help out somebody else. And then later on, go back to Michael and say, hey, Michael, keep me in mind. And they do that 100 times, and things land your way.
That makes a lot of sense. And to put it back in the perspective of our sports analogies, LeBron passes more than any superstar I've ever seen. And I think,
is that true? Is that statistically true?
The last stat I saw was a comparison between
so fun
him
to watch, right?
and KD, Kevin Durant, and his pass percent versus the number of shots he takes. First, he gets the most out of every shot, but he passes at a higher rate than most other superstars, which means a lot more people want to play with him because he's giving and not taking all the time. And I think that philosophy makes a lot of sense in sports, and you just made it make sense in business, and that's fascinating. So I think our audience is going to take that gem and apply that and use that to build a very impactful network for themselves.
Thank you. Well, I'll tell you this is just, and I'll leave it with this. I mean, I'll give you the story. I've got 2 guys on my team, and both of them happen to be like single. One guy was like, after 8 years, they became single. And another guy, after a couple of years, also, they both became single at the same time. Right. And one guy was single for like, literally, he must have been single for a month. Right. The second guy was single for like 2 years. Right. The second guy, much better looking. I mean, just a much better looking guy than the first one. Right. But he was single for a long time. And we were joking about this, but it's totally true about business development or job, finding a job. The first guy, I mean, he was just proactively, he just aggressively met people, he would talk to everybody. Right. And because of the truth in numbers and the power of numbers, he was able to find somebody else, and it was, the game was over. The other one who had, better looking, better shape, he didn't really, he was scared to talk to people. And, he eventually found somebody, but, you need to go out there and put yourself out there and embarrass yourself a little bit and be uncomfortable. And, it's activity breeds activity at the end of the day. So I think if you're executive, you have to look at your activity, reverse engineer it, and realize, okay, if my numbers right now are 0, then I need to figure this out to get some more activity. But just, it's not the market. It's not COVID. It's not, the government, watch less Netflix and do other things and use your time to go out there and improve your career. If that's what you want to do, right? If that's a priority. So
how can our audience find out more about you and about the McGehrin Group?
Right. So the easiest, sort of low hanging fruit. You just go on LinkedIn. If you look for George McGehrin, and if you even remotely type in the last name, so it's McGehrin. But if you remotely even type it in correctly, it will show up. I'm the only George McGehrin there. You'll see me with my big mug and my, big schnoz here. But so that's the easiest way. LinkedIn is a great way. You can send me a message.
This has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your frameworks with our audience. We can't wait to get this podcast out to them.
Mark, thank you. I appreciate your questions. I loved it's a great podcast, and I appreciate all the wisdom that you bring as well to the show. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. McGehrin for coming on to the podcast. A really fun interview. To learn more about Mr. McGehrin or the McGehrin Group, please check the links in the show notes. Before I give you my closing comments, I'd like to reintroduce you to this episode's sponsor, consumervoice.org.
If you're looking for non-bias, technology-driven product reviews and ratings across various categories, check out consumervoice.org. Consumervoice.org ranks companies and products using a proprietary algorithm incorporating expert and customer reviews, user experience, lifetime value, and overall brand trustworthiness. Before you spend your hard-earned money, visit consumervoice.org.
I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, hit subscribe. I know you're going to share this episode with your colleagues because the best people listen to this podcast. If you like career coaching X's and O's, you may like one of my other podcasts, Gorillapreneur, The Art of Waging Small Business Warfare. If you're a business maverick, a startup maverick, that might be the podcast for you. In that podcast, we help the Davids defeat the Goliaths. You may also like gigging everything in the sharing economy. On that podcast, we meet with entrepreneurs, CEOs, market makers, and market leaders to predict the future of the sharing, gig, and platform economy. If you're struggling to get your career moving in the direction that you want it to go in, if you're having trouble managing multiple bosses, or maybe you're struggling to get credit for the work that you do every day, share those issues with us and we will research them, and we might even do a podcast episode about them. And if you need more help resolving those issues, please reach out to us on the web at ceyero.com, ceyero.com, and let us help you develop a plan for your career. Please also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ceyero-consulting. This has been Career Coaching X's and O's, and I am your host, Mark Anthony Peterson, founder and thought leader at Ceyero Consulting.